Hi, this is Machine Pun Kelly, and today I want to talk about DEI. Before we get going, I'll let you know there is a link to a free Substack article below. That contains the script for this video with inline links. So if you have any questions about where I got this information, just review it in the Substack article. Now let's get going. As the term DEI is attacked by the current presidential administration, let's consider what it is and what it is not. DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and we'll delve into what that means in a moment. But before we do that, we need to talk about what it isn't. And the reason we have to talk about what it isn't is that there are stalwarts like Stephen Miller who deliberately misrepresent it to skew other people's understanding of it. Succinctly put, DEI has absolutely nothing to do with quotas. First, let's talk about affirmative action, so we can distinguish DEI from what it is almost always conflated with by people who don't understand it or who deliberately want to misrepresent it. The legal term affirmative action was first used in Executive Order number 10925, which was signed by President John F. Kennedy on March 6, 1961. It included a provision that government contractors take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and employees are treated fairly during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. The problem was that there wasn't much guidance as to what affirmative action meant, nor on how it was to be implemented. More importantly, how did you identify whether it was being followed? The right would have you believe they did this through quotas. However, the Supreme Court decided in the Regents of the University of California v. Bach in 1978 that quotas violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and are therefore unconstitutional. Furthermore, it is illegal to choose an unqualified candidate over a qualified candidate due to race, gender, etc., and no one is suggesting it should be. Ergo, quotas simply do not exist, and all the talk about it is deliberate misrepresentation by dishonest succubuses like Stephen Miller. Since they are a non-issue, we won't spend any more time on them. Suffice to say, they have absolutely nothing to do with DEI, and anyone who says they do either doesn't know what DEI is, or they are hoping you don't while they misrepresent it. So what is DEI? Well, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let's talk about diversity. Diversity is really just a fact. It is an acknowledgement that people have many differences which don't affect performance. These may include race, ethnicity, gender, age, religion, disability, sexual orientation, education, gender identity, veteran status, and more. They even extend to things like expectant mothers versus expectant fathers. Stigmas about mothers could impact a hiring decision negatively, whereas an expectant father might be more likely to get a job because they'll have a family to care for. There are studies that even show that things like height, physical attractiveness, and weight have been statistically proven to affect hirings, promotions, and pay rates. There are lots of assumptions we can consciously or unconsciously make about people. When considering diversity in DEI, it's just acknowledging diversity exists, as do our own biases that can unfairly influence hiring and promoting decisions. Equity. When discussing equity, it's often compared to equality. Consider two runners are running a 1-mile race. One is forced to wear a 2-pound ankle weight. Halfway through the race, someone says, "Hey, this isn't fair," and stops the race. How do you resume the race in a way that is fair to both runners? The answer to the question is that you can't. Inequality is the issue. Equity is the correction. The two runners started unequally. Balancing out that inequality is equity. While some call this reverse discrimination, remember, reversing discrimination is not reverse discrimination. There is a popular meme which illustrates the difference between equality and equity. There are 3 kids on boxes trying to see over a fence to watch a baseball game. In the first image, they each have 1 box. The tallest kid doesn't even need a box, while the shortest kid can't see over the fence even with a box. So the tall kid gives the shortest kid his box. The idea is that in equality, everyone is treated equally, but in equity, the imbalance is corrected so they can all see over the fence. While this does illustrate the conceptual difference between equality and equity, it's still got problems, because all 3 kids are still just illegally watching a baseball game. The basic problem with the meme is that if the baseball game is a metaphor for the American people, and the wall symbolizes the barrier to the American dream, then letting them just look illegally over the wall is not equity. Equity would require them being able to watch the game legally. This scenario is more likely to end with the cop coming along, seeing the kids breaking the law, accosting them, kneeling on one of their necks for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, which results in 40 million people protesting, which affects the presidential elections, and then the loser has white supremacists storm the Capitol building in an effort to overturn the results of the election. And then everyone yells about critical race theory and DEI for the next 4 years so that they can make DEI the scapegoat, outlaw it, and pretend the real problem is that anyone thought the kids should be able to enjoy the game legally in the first place. When you stop to think about it, there is only one way to get equity, and that is inclusion. The problem in the analogy is comparing the 3 kids, all of whom are excluded from the game, with one another, and not with the people who are inside the park watching the game. If the game represents the American dream, the only way equity is achieved is by having the kids inside the park, sitting in the stands, watching the game with everyone else. That is inclusion. So let's distinguish between quotas and inclusion. Let's go back to our earlier discussion of diversity and what that means. There are people of color, those with disabilities, men, women, gays, lesbians, non-binary people, short people, pregnant people, fat people, women who are pregnant, men who are pregnant, women who aren't pregnant, men who aren't pregnant. All of them deserve a chance at getting jobs. But quotas is not the way to ensure that. The first problem with quotas is that they are unconstitutional, morally wrong, and illegal. The second issue with quotas is it would be impossible to create or enforce quotas for every group of people. Sure, you might be able to make quotas based on race, but what about people who identify as ugly? Or what about intersectionality, where one person is in multiple groups? Would black lesbians be 3 categories or 1? The third issue with quotas is that they can be counterproductive, as all people in the quota group are often considered by others as having just gotten in because of quotas, even though they got in based on merit. This means the end result in marginalized people are excluded rather than included, and inclusion is the goal. Inclusion is different in that it uses a kind of scorecard. Data is a barometer, not a goal. Inclusion is not picking specific people from within certain groups. It's expanding the circle to find qualified candidates in every group of people, not just one. Rather than setting specific quotas, with DEI, you look at the data to measure diversity. And with inclusion, it's more than just about who gets the job. It's about how much each employee is valued and respected once they have the job. Here's an analogy that might help. This is Bob. Bob likes meatloaf with mashed potatoes and gravy. He likes it so much, in fact, that that's all he ever eats. Gets it from the same average diner every day. So then one day he meets someone who encourages him to try different foods. So he starts trying every restaurant in the area. He tries sushi and taco and lasagna and barbecue and fried catfish and so on. Every day, he diversifies his experience of food. And in the process, two things happen. First, the restaurants benefit from his business. But second, he benefits by expanding his experience and appreciation of food. Such is the case with diversity in the workplace. While people who are hired obviously benefit, they bring an array of personalities, cultures, perspective, experiences, viewpoints, and solutions to the workplace that improve the workplace. Even in things like healthcare, diversity improves the workplace. The National Library of Medicine looked at 16 reviews that showed patients received better outcomes when care was provided by more diverse teams. Some people would like to measure merit by metaphorically ordering meatloaf with mashed potatoes and gravy from every restaurant. But that misses the point. Many conservatives talk about merit like it is in opposition to DEI. It absolutely is not. And the suggestion that it is a racist dog whistle. Just because a marginalized person got a job doesn't mean a more qualified straight white man missed out on one. But that's what they would have you believe. And they'll say that makes you the racist. Studies repeatedly show that when the only thing that changes in a job application is the name, people with white-sounding names are more likely to get callbacks for the jobs than people with black-sounding names. So this idea that black people are getting selected with inferior resumes is provably and ridiculously false. But even beyond that, who decides what merit means? Elon Musk and his ilk would have you believe that it is a very specific thing, universally measured, but it isn't. Imagine two people applying for the same job. Tyrone is 25 and took 6 years to get through college because he had to pay his own way through. He also stayed at home with his single mom to help pay the rent and raise his little brother. Chad is 23. He flew through college in 4 years. He stayed in a fraternity he didn't have to pay for. His parents paid for all his room and board, so he didn't have to work. They had similar classes, but Chad had a slightly better GPA and got through school faster. But does that mean he had more merit? Or does Tyrone's life experience count for something too? The answer is, it depends on the employer. As long as the person hired meets the advertised qualifications, it doesn't matter who the most qualified is, because that's impossible to define. The notion that DEI hires are reverse racism is in fact actual racism, because it assumes a person of color getting a job over a white person is not based on merit, but on some quota that doesn't even exist. We should celebrate diversity, equity, and inclusion. And people who are opposed to it should be asked which of those things specifically they are opposed to and why. And if and when they lie about it, they should be taken to task. This is not a controversy. It is a false flag.